Bonjour, I'm Robert York with Hall York Design. Welcome to today's Chair Chat, and we're talking about all things New Orleans.
Okay, how did your love of New Orleans first start and what really hooked you in the beginning?
I've always been drawn to the coast. I've always been drawn to water, and I've always been drawn to areas by the sea. And I've always been a little bit of a Francophile. I've always had this thing for French culture. And so the minute New Orleans came into my peripheral understanding as a child, I was fascinated with it. My parents were mortified that I wanted to go to Tulane. I wanted to go to Tulane and join the architecture program. And my mother said, absolutely not am I sending my baby to New Orleans by himself. And so I started school here in Knoxville, but all the while still had this kind of fascination with New Orleans. And so when I met Ron in 2007, I was finishing my design degree and he was considering moving to New Orleans. And so he and I took a few trips together. And the next thing you know, we're looking at houses together, and then we bought the cottage. And it just kind of all fell into place from there. It was one of those things that felt a little bit like serendipity because it just kind of naturally fell into my lap. Like, obviously, we pursued it to a point, but also, like, it just was meant to be.
I also feel like everyone externally has a perception of New Orleans, but do you feel like you know things about New Orleans or the culture that you couldn't understand from the outside?
Absolutely. There's so many things about New Orleans that are below the surface of what you think New Orleans is. I've always found, this beauty in the decay and this juxtaposition of faded glory and faded architecture. And so this sense and notion that New Orleans has been around for 300 years and is still thriving, although she may be a little gritty and a little rough around the edges, I think that's part of what makes it real and a part of what makes it feel authentic to me. I go to other places around the country that are, beautiful places that are built to be modeled after historical architecture and historical places, and they feel inauthentic. And I think that's the thing about New Orleans that has always appealed to me is that it feels very real and it feels very, what you see is what you get. And I like that. There's no pretense about it. It can be beautiful, but it can also be imperfect, and that's okay.
And of course, you've designed homes for the context of New Orleans, but is there anything about the impact of New Orleans that you've taken with you into designing homes in other states and other areas?
I think it would be a fusion of things. I think the thing about New Orleans, it is a melting pot. It is, it's gumbo. It's a little bit of everything. And I think that plays into my design aesthetic. I don't have a favorite color. I don't have a favorite era of design. I'm very driven by context. What looks good in the context of what you have? What looks good in the space that you're in? What makes the space feel balanced? And for me with New Orleans, it's everything. There's new architecture, there's old architecture, it's European influence, it's Caribbean influence, it's this melting pot to me. And I think that's what always appealed to me about New Orleans.
Is there a word or a style that you would use to capture where your projects in New Orleans are going in the future and what you're working on currently?
Fun. The thing about New Orleans is you can't take yourself too seriously when you're in New Orleans. And so even in traditional design, it's always a little whimsical. It's always a little playful. There's always a little unexpected motif or a little unexpected pop of color, or there's just something about it that you're not always expecting, but it feels grounded and it feels historically accurate.
So on that point, we'll do an unexpected question, but if you were to personify New Orleans into a caricature, how would you describe her?
Ooh. Well, she would be sassy for sure, and she'd be very colorful, and she would probably have a feather boa and Mardi Gras beads around her neck. The thing about New Orleans is you can't take yourself too seriously when you're in New Orleans. You also can't be a control freak. Laissez le bon temps brûler. You have to just kind of let things roll and let things be what they're going to be.
That you could say chair chat, and anywhere you're at, as long as
I'm in a chair,
it's a chair chat.
It's a chair chat, technically. It's true.
Perfect. All right, let's get the intro.
All right. Bonjour.